Hello, welcome to your free on-demand cooking demonstration. If we haven't met before, my name is Shannon, and I am a non-diet dietitian. I specialize in plant-based nutrition and optimizing your health and well-being without dieting. Personally, I put myself through some very restrictive eating habits that not only harmed my physical health, but also was detrimental to my mental well-being. And I've since learned that eating plant-based isn't about trying to control our body or trying to achieve, perfect health. Plant-based eating is all about compassion towards ourselves, towards the environment, and towards all living beings. So welcome to my kitchen, and I hope you are enjoying your kitchen at this time as well, as we take a moment to just be really compassionate about the cooking process and eating more plant foods. A little bit more about my journey. Well, cooking became a passion of mine very early on, and it's honestly the one thing that made going plant-based so much fun. By learning a variety of different cooking skills and techniques, getting comfortable in the kitchen and with different plant foods that we're going to work with today, you gain that confidence to experiment in the kitchen and make these delicious meals. Plus, I believe taking a hands-on approach like cooking is one of the best ways to build a positive relationship with your food, with your body, and with your overall well-being. And I didn't just discover this on my own journey, I've helped plenty of people discover that too. So with all of that being said, make sure you have some dedicated time in your kitchen to go through this cooking demonstration with hopefully minimal distractions. I want you to really tune in to your journey, to the process of cooking this delicious recipe. It's all about the journey, chefs, not just about the final dish. Okay, so as we get started, make sure you have all of your equipment. You'll need a large stock pot with a lid. You'll either need a standing blender, or I will be using an immersion blender. You also need a cutting surface, so your cutting board, and a wonderful sharpened chef's knife. You'll need some prep bowls. So an example would be like these clear little bowls or some bigger plastic bowls, some measuring spoons and cups to make sure we mise en place, which we'll talk about in a second. You'll want some heat-safe measuring cups, two exactly, about 1 to 2 cups in size, such as this one. And then, of course, you need all of your ingredients, which we will review now. But just before we review our ingredients for our creamy pumpkin pasta with crispy sage, whenever you're trying something new in the kitchen or trying to multitask with your meal prep, it's important to start with your mise en place. Now, this is a French term that means everything in its place. So if you haven't already, then go ahead and measure out all the ingredients for the recipe, except for the onion, garlic, and sage, which we will prep together. These were provided to you in an email that went out with your registration for today's demonstration. So go back and check that demonstration, or just hit pause and check the next slide with the list of ingredients. By the way, since this is on demand, you have the freedom to take this demonstration at your own pace. Feel free to pause when you need to if something's taking a little longer. Feel free to speed it up, fast forward if you're like, this is too much, I got this. Or slow it down, repeat things, such as when we're chopping and learning our knife skills, okay? So let's review our ingredients first. You can see this is my mise en place so far. So you're gonna need 3/4 cups of whole raw cashews. Now this recipe calls for 12 ounces of penne pasta. Of course, I'm not using penne today because this is all I had in my pantry. This is where you can get creative. But I do recommend a type of pasta such as fazooli or penne that will really hold the sauce. So something with a hole through the middle, or that has like little ridges in it where the pasta can really stick. The sauce can really stick to the pasta. Now this is not 12 ounces because I'm gonna make a huge batch of sauce and then I'm going to save some. So I'm only making a little bit of pasta so that I can freeze some of the sauce for a later time. You're going to want some iodized salt. You need plenty of olive oil. So about 1 tablespoon for the sauce, and then another 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil for the crispy sage. We're gonna chop up
half of a medium sweet onion here, as well as 3 cloves of garlic that we will be mincing together. You'll want 1 cup of pureed pumpkin. I got this from a can, so it's not pumpkin pie filling, it's just plain pumpkin. And I actually took this out of the freezer, which is why you can see there's a little more liquid to this after it defrosted. You'll need 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. If you don't have apple cider vinegar, you can also use lemon juice. And then for our seasonings, we need about half a teaspoon of black pepper, about a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, about an 1/8 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and another 1/4 to half teaspoon of iodized salt. Now, when we're flavoring our sauce, you want to have a little extra of all of these ingredients on hand, just in case you want to adjust the seasonings to your food preferences or your taste preferences, okay? Now for the crispy sage, again, you need that extra olive oil, about 2 to 3 tablespoons. If you're making the whole batch of pasta, so 12 ounces of pasta, then you'll want about a 1/4 cup of chopped sage, because I'm only making about 2 servings here. I just have the rest of the leaves that I had in my refrigerator, so the fresh sage, and if it's not really big leaves, then we'll roughly chop this later. And then make sure you have one of those heat-safe measuring glasses that you can microwave that's filled with water already.
And then just to make sure we're being extra efficient, if you don't stand right next to the trash can while it's open when you're prepping and chopping, I recommend having a little prep bowl next to you so you can discard any waste. For example, when we're chopping the onion and the garlic. And then I forgot to mention that when we do the crispy sage, you will want a medium-sized skillet. I love cast iron just because it does provide a little more flavor and it can help with our iron absorption if you are a fully plant-based eater and need that support. But really, it's just because of the flavor.
So the first thing we want to do is we want to microwave this water. It's about 1.5 cups for 2 to 2.5 minutes on high until you can see some bubbles and it's at that simmering boiling point, because we're going to soak our cashews in here to soften them up. It makes it a lot easier for them to blend. So go ahead and microwave your water. And while that's microwaving behind me, go ahead and fill your stock pot with enough water to boil your pasta and get that boiling on high heat on your stove.
Okay, so we put our stock pot with water over high heat, and then to make it boil a little faster, I always like to add the lid here. While this is boiling, we are going to chop our onion, garlic, and sage and finish that mise en place. So everything is ready when it comes time to make the sauce. Once this starts boiling, we will add our salt and boil our pasta, and we'll reserve some of that cooking pasta water.
Okay, we are boiling. So now that that is nice and hot, we're going to carefully add those raw cashews. And these are going to soak basically until we need to make the sauce. So you can just set this aside while your pasta water is boiling, and then we'll go ahead and prep our onion, garlic, and our sage.
So before we start chopping, let's make sure we're properly holding our knife. Your chef's knife can be your absolute best friend in the kitchen. This is honestly pretty much the only tool I use 95% of the time in the kitchen. So I really want you to get comfortable with this, get comfortable with your knife, and make sure you have a really sharp knife. Keep it nice and sharp. So to hold your knife, we're going to use the pinch grip, okay? So you take your thumb and your first finger and you pinch between the handle and the blade, okay? Then you wrap your 3 other fingers around the bottom so that you don't have your first finger on top. This is going to take away stability and support on each side, and it can cause you to lose balance as you're chopping, especially if you're doing something really tough. By having that pinch grip, you have a lot more control over your knife. Now, when you are chopping, which we'll show you in a second from a different view, we want to make sure that there's always some point of the knife on the cutting surface at all times. So you're going to have this rocking motion from tip to heel of the blade, tip to heel. Okay, so it's sliding it forward and then pulling the heel up and rocking it back. Okay, rather than this chop, 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 lifting it up off the cutting board, because this can cause a higher risk of chopping down on something that shouldn't be chopped. Right? Now, when we're holding something, your non-chopping hand is going to use a bear claw grip. So start like this, and then curl your fingertips under like you're creating a bear crawl. Now your first finger acts as a little protection barrier, I guess, as you're moving your knife along what you're trying to cut, and you're not going to chop off your fingernails. Okay. So remember how to hold this as we start to chop our onion and garlic.
So once you can properly dice an onion, you'll have the basic foundation of how to dice a lot of different produce items. And this is probably the most efficient way. This is how chefs are taught in chef school. So when you start with a whole onion, you want to cut this little tail off while leaving the core, those little hairy parts, that one intact. So I'm going to firmly hold this down since it's a round object and just cut off that little tip there. And now I have a flat surface to work with on the bottom. So I'm going to place that firmly down, and I'm going to slice through the core to create two halves. So I've angled my knife so that my tip hits first, and then I rock back with the heel of the blade. So I've angled my knife so that my tip hits first, and then I rock back with the heel of the blade and press the knife forward rather than back towards me, which is a common mistake. So now we're gonna peel the skin off. So the reason we wanna do it this way is because onions contain a lot of gases. This is why a lot of us cry, right? So to prevent us from causing those gases to get really, really strong, we wanna not cut through the tip until the very end. I know we did that to have it, but it's really not as much cutting as you would think. Once we cut through that top part, those gases, we break through the cell walls, and those gases just start to release and cause us to tear up. Now, some of us are onion criers and some of us are not. It is actually more of a genetic thing than anything. Although I do hear folks with contacts will cry less because that acts as a little bit of a barrier, which is good for them. So I'm just gonna peel off these little tough spots. Don't wanna waste my onion here. Okay, so I've got the round edge and I've got the flat edge. Again, we're keeping this part intact for as long as possible, okay? So I'm going to place my onion so that this flat edge is towards me. And you see these grooves in the onion as it goes around, right? I'm gonna angle my knife with those ridges as I work across this way. Now I'm gonna try to get my tip as close to this top piece as I can without going through it. And I wanna make sure my blade goes all the way through to hitting the cutting board. Okay, so I'm gonna have to just angle this a little differently because of my camera setting here. So I angle the knife with the ridge. And you can see I've got my bear claw. And once you get more comfortable with this, you can make smaller slices. Be great if you're doing like a red onion for salad, right? But feel free to make them as thick as needed. Now, once I get halfway, I'm gonna change my non-dominant hand to my pinch grip. So my thumb and my first finger hold the slices together, but I keep going with the angle of the onion. And then this last one, I kind of use that thumb to push all the way through because it's a tough angle. All right, so we've got our slices. You can see those all the way across. Now I turn it 90 degrees and I chop the other direction into our dices. Look at that. So remember this because we're gonna use a very similar technique for our garlic. Try to get as close to the top as you can, and that's all we have left. Now I'm gonna use my prep bowl and just set this aside to make sure I have a clear cutting surface for my next chopping. Next up is our garlic. So of course you can buy pre-minced garlic in the jar. I find that flavor to be a little different than what I prefer, which is fresh garlic. And you can either chop this using your knife like I'll demonstrate now, or you can make it really easy by using a garlic press like this, which is gonna help you mince a lot faster, but you'll have an extra tool to clean up afterwards. The choice is yours, but I prefer fresh because we get the most nutritional benefits out of this. Garlic is really anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, antifungal, lots of things that cause our body to not feel its best. So the first thing we want to do is gently smash each clove just to release a little bit of the oils. So just until you hear that little like pop or crack. We just don't want to smash it entirely so that it loses its shape, because that shape is going to help us properly dice it. So just a little smash here. And by smashing it, we've released the oils and it allows us to easily peel off the skin. Okay, so set 2 cloves aside and we'll start with 1 clove. Now this will really help if you have a pretty big clove with a flat side, because we're actually gonna cut it a pretty similar way to our onion. So I'm gonna hold it with the pinch grip since this is very small, and I'm gonna try to keep the root right here intact. I'm gonna cut little slices across the width, as many as you can. And then you turn it that 90 degrees and you dice it. Now, if this is really thick like mine, I can even turn my blade parallel to the cutting board and cut it that way. And that way I have less to chop afterwards. But now I'm gonna mince. And this is really just to create uniform in the pieces when we go to saute the garlic, because eventually it's going to get blended up and it doesn't really matter what size they are. But when you're cooking garlic, you do want it to be pretty uniform shape so that some don't burn and some don't get like undercooked. Okay, so I'm going to slide this aside. Now notice I'm turning my blade over to the spine, so that's the flat part, not the sharp part. Always do that if you're trying to move things around rather than using the actual blade. That can dull the knife if you're like scraping like that. Now this one is really skinny, so I'm actually not going to use that method. I'm just going to turn it that 90 degrees and chop this way as best you can. Get rid of that root. And then from here, you can just gather it up and rock back and forth and then gently take it off the blade and rock back and forth. And we'll just do this until they're smaller. You don't have like really big chunks here. And I'll do this at the end just to make sure they're all the same size as well. Just a few different options with how you can mince your garlic here. This is probably the most uniform way. You just want a lot of control over your knife to watch your fingers, right? And you turn it and chop. I know a lot of people don't like chopping garlic because it's sticky, it's messy, it takes a long time, maybe we're not good at it. Well, you can enjoy it if you are good at it, right? So practice makes perfect. So if you really want, you can just go back and forth and go like this. If you feel like, you know, the pieces aren't all uniform or one was cut a little bigger than the other. And then we'll just set this aside in our little prep bowl so that we can clear off our cutting surface. Next up is going to be our sage. Now, if you have some really small leaves, then you really don't have to chop them. Some folks actually enjoy using whole leaves. I just find that pan frying them goes a lot easier and faster when you roughly chop them. So I'm just going to bunch them up. Now I don't want them super small because we're gonna pan fry these in oil and they can easily burn. Fresh herbs are pretty delicate. So even if you're just roughly tearing them apart to make sure, you know, there's not some really large leaves and really small leaves, we'll be keeping a good eye on these as we pan fry them. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just giving it a rough chop can help.
Okay, we are boiling. Anytime we are going to boil pasta, we want to season the water with salt. Okay, so again, I'm using iodized salt here, and I'm gonna add this is like 6 ounces of pasta. I'm gonna add about like one teaspoon, sorry, 1 teaspoon there. And this isn't going to like increase the sodium content of your dish really. Adding salt to your water for cooking pasta is really going to help with the tenderness and the flavor of the pasta itself, okay? Pasta, dried pasta specifically, is really, really bland. So to help flavor it and tenderize it, we add that salt. Now that that's added, we'll add our dry pasta. And I'm gonna cook this 1 minute less than the package directions state. Now I'm using a gluten-free pasta, so it does cook a little differently to make sure it doesn't stick. I'm going to move it around a little bit. So set your timer to make sure you don't miss the cooking duration. Again, 1 minute less than what your package directions state. We want it to be al dente. Al dente means to the tooth, so that it's soft on the outside, but a little dense, a little chewy on the inside, because it's gonna finish cooking in the sauce. Highly recommend this for most of your pasta dishes where you're cooking the pasta separate from the sauce and then putting it all together at the end. Okay, so while this is boiling, you're going to prep your sage and clean up any dishes along the way. Now, working as a non-diet dietitian, I hear a lot of fear around high carbohydrate foods, including pasta. Pasta itself can be high in carbohydrates, but in order to build a balanced plant-based dish, we need carbohydrates in our meals. Our body and our brain thrive off of carbohydrates, okay? And there's a huge spectrum of different types of carbohydrates, from simple, quick digesting, quick energy, to more complex, fiber rich, slow absorbing. And thankfully, nowadays in today's grocery stores, we can find all sorts of different types of pastas, from your most refined white, very traditional pasta, all the way to whole wheat, legume based, made from chickpeas, quinoa, black beans, edamame even. There's so much variety out there. And I actually love that there is this variety, because you can incorporate protein and fiber into a traditionally high carbohydrate food. And that's totally fine. It's also fine if you choose a traditional white pasta, because guess what? You're not just eating the pasta itself, we're combining it with a very nutritious pumpkin sauce using a cashew cream. It's going to have more fiber, more protein, more healthy fats in there. And you can think about this with most of your pasta dishes, right? Even though the pasta itself might be a quick carbohydrate source, you're most likely pairing it with some vegetables, some protein, and some fat, which all creates that balance in our macronutrients. So those big energy providing foods, as well as our micronutrients, giving us all those essential vitamins and minerals that we need, especially important for a plant-based diet. So I want you to ask yourself, like, why do I fear pasta? Why do I fear carbohydrates? Or what is my relationship around pasta like? Really reflect on that and consider your relationship with other carbohydrate foods, not just pasta. Because I have to say, pasta is a very affordable and shelf stable carbohydrate. It's one of the quickest cooking carbs that you can incorporate into a plant-based dish. So to stock up on different varieties of pasta noodles can make your plant-based meal prep and, needing dinner in a flash type of scenario so much less stressful and enjoyable. And there are so many different pasta dishes, different sauces, different things we can incorporate into them to make them absolutely delicious and nutritious. Okay, once your timer goes off, turn off the heat to your stove. But before you discard the water, grab your heat safe measuring cup with a handle ideally. And you want to try to save 1 1/4 cup, maybe 1 1/2 cup of this cooking water. I have my little rag to make sure I don't spill. I'm just going to dip it in here, let that fill up as much as I can. Looks like I got just enough here. And then we're just going to set this aside. I highly recommend saving your cooking pasta water for anytime you're making a sauce from scratch because this is flavored with your pasta. So it's not just diluting a sauce, but this can really help finish off the cooking process when you put the cooked pasta back in with the sauce, which we'll do at the end. And it can help make this a little more creamier without having to use excess ingredients like a plant-based milk or like a vegetable broth, unless you really want to use those. I like to minimize how many ingredients we use. Okay, so let's drain our pasta. Okay, so I like to set my colander on top of a bowl, or if you're using a different stock pot from your sauce pot, you can just set it right back on your bowl. But this allows the water to continue draining. And some pastas, specifically those that are gluten-free, really starchy, I like to spray with a little oil. Now, this is just avocado oil. This spray I pour with actual avocado oil, and I just refill it on my own. I think it's like 10 bucks on Amazon. It's really helpful for salads and sauteing. And so I'm just going to toss it with a little bit of this just so it doesn't stick, because this sauce is going to take a little longer to cook and this is going to cool off. I don't want it to just clump up together. So we'll just set that aside and get started on our sauce. So back in the same stock pot we just used, you can call this a one pot meal if you're using an immersion blender. I'm going to put this over like low, medium, almost medium heat, only because it's already pretty hot from being a boil. And then once the surface is hot, which it is, I'm going to add my olive oil. And so I'm adding about 1 tablespoon. Now you don't want to pour your olive oil or any oil directly out of the container, which is why I'm using this extra like little liquid measuring cup, because the steam and the heat can enter the bottle of the oil and it can cause that oil to go rancid. So always try to pour it in something separate. And this is really just to coat the pan. We add our oil first once the pot is hot. And then we add our onion, just a little sprinkle, and you can hear it already sizzling. So we know the oil is hot enough to add the rest of our onion. And we're really just sauteing this to bring out some of the sweetness, take away some of that bite, right? So we'll just toss this around in the oil. And I'm going to add a little pinch of salt. Adding salt at the beginning of the cooking process, especially when you're cooking down some veggies and aromatics, can really help draw the moisture out of those vegetables. Again, it's really not providing a ton of salty flavor. It would if you added the salt at the very end of the cooking process, like right on top of the finished dish, then that would be really salty. But for now, the salt is really helping with the texture and the flavor of what we're cooking. So these onions. We're not trying to caramelize them. We're really just trying to sweat them out a little bit, soften them. And you'll notice it goes from like a more bright white to a translucent, a little bit of a yellowish color. So you'll saute for about 2 to 3 minutes before we add our garlic. All right, time to add our garlic. So I'm just going to create a little space in the center of the pan. Add our garlic. Now, garlic is really fragile and delicate, but we do want it to get contact with the heat and the oil so that it toasts. It's going to get really fragrant. And I know you might be urged to add more garlic to this dish, which is totally up to you if you like a strong garlicky flavor. But we want the subtle sweetness of our pumpkin as well, right? We don't want to overpower it. And garlic is one of those overpowering ingredients. All right, I'll start to incorporate this. So because we're trying to find a good balance between the pumpkin and some of our more savory and other flavors, we don't want to do too much garlic. But by heating it up, we're going to take, again, a little bit of that bite and spiciness out of it and just make this really flavorful. So your garlic only needs to saute for about 1 minute. So I'm going to turn off the heat again of my stove. Now it's time to drain our soaked cashews. These should be nice and soft, making it a lot easier to blend them. So since you still have the colander in the sink, let's go ahead and drain all this excess water. And it goes right back in your measuring cup. Okay, next step you have two options. One, to use a traditional stand-up blender, or two, to come with me and use an immersion blender. This is actually a really nifty tool to have in the kitchen. It's a much more affordable than a high-speed blender, and it has multiple purposes. You can buy them with just the regular S-blade attachment, or you can get them with a whisk, several other different attachments. I know they're really affordable on Amazon. You could even go to a kitchen store and get like an upscale one. I've even found them in like discount stores like Marshalls and TJ Maxx and things like that. So be on the lookout because these can be really helpful. Now, if you're using a traditional blender, then you are going to add your soaked cashews and 1 cup of your cooking water to the blender and blend those two ingredients together. That's going to create your cashew cream, kind of like a cashew milk. Okay, just blend that until it's really smooth. Then you will add all the remaining sauce ingredients. Okay, now the difference between using the blender and making this a one-pot meal with the immersion blender is I'm going to leave my onion and garlic in the pan when I add my cashews and my water to blend. Okay, so if you're using the immersion blender, then we're going to add our cashews with the onion and garlic and our cooking water, 1 to 1.25 cup. Okay, so I'm going to put this on the lowest speed to make sure I get the deepest part. I'm going to put my blade into the liquid and then blend. Okay, so you can already see that this is a really like milky kind of cashew creamy consistency. Of course, this is going to look a little thicker than if you were to just blend the cashews and the water in the blender, because we already obviously have the onion and the garlic in here. But hello fiber, look at that. Just the onion, garlic, and cashews already make this cream a really fiber rich sauce. Now, cashew cream, just the soaked cashews and the water, is a really great way to start off a creamy type of sauce. So making an Alfredo sauce, even a mac and cheese sauce. You can even do cashew cream and make it a little thicker if you want to make like a vegan cheese queso dip. So this is a really good base to making your own like cashew cream milk type of thing. Now that we have the cream started, we can add our thicker ingredients. So in goes our canned pumpkin, our seasonings, our apple cider vinegar, which is going to really help balance out the flavors. We always need a little acidity in here. Then some Dijon mustard. So you've got like this natural salty condiment. Also, mustard has a lot of great nutritional benefits here. But you'll think about pumpkin being this more like subtle sweetness type of winter squash, right? But to really create flavor and balance in a sauce like this, we have to incorporate all different types of flavor, not just the sweet. We need the sour, the bitter, the salty, all to create this umami flavor, which means savory. And this nutritional yeast fortified with B12, which is a really important vitamin if you are fully plant-based, is exactly that umami flavor. Now, if you wanted to make this more of an Alfredo pumpkin sauce or a mac and cheese pumpkin sauce, you could absolutely add more of that nutritional yeast. The goal of the recipe as it's written is not to make it super cheesy. This is really just to help balance out flavor and provide some nutritional benefit to the sauce as well. Let's go ahead and cream this again or blend it in your blender.
Voila, and there is our starting point, okay?
Any recipe you are following or making is a starting point. It is your guide. It's up to you as the chef and the producer of that recipe to change it in a way that best suits your nutritional needs, your food preferences, your flavor preferences. So by all means, please give this a taste test. and make sure you adjust the flavorings. Maybe you want more pepper. I always want more pepper. Maybe you want to spice it up and put some crushed red pepper in here. But what flavor are you really going for? Okay. Absolutely add some more apple cider vinegar, Dijon mustard, change it up, taste along the way, and adjust it to what tastes best for you. Now, before I make this warm again and add our pasta, like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm making a smaller batch. So I made the whole batch of sauce, but I only made about half the amount of pasta. So I'm going to scoop some of this pasta out into a food safe container, and I'm going to freeze it, and then I'll add the pasta. So when you're cooking like this, I want you to think ahead, right? We have some busy weeks coming up, and by making a big batch of this sauce, I know that I have a really easy sauce in the freezer that I can pull out the night before and have a quick cooking carbohydrate and grain like pasta to put together a really simple dinner on any night that I'm either low on energy, low on fresh food. And this is a great way to build up stock in a variety of different flavor components so that you're not always eating the same thing, right? So important as plant-based eaters and as non-dieters to vary our diet and really get excited about eating different types of foods and meals, okay? I can always add some back in, so I'm just gonna set that right here because that might have been too much. But let's go ahead and turn the heat back on just at a low because some of these ingredients were too cold, and I'm gonna bring it up to temperature. And then we add our cooked pasta. So if you take anything away from today's demonstration, know that you should always put the cooked pasta back in with the sauce and incorporate it together. Allow the pasta to finish cooking right in the sauce versus putting a bowl of plain cooked pasta or putting a serving of plain cooked pasta in a bowl and then putting a dollop of the sauce right on top. I know that sounds easier and it's just really convenient, but this is how you get that really satisfying finishing pasta dish. You can see by the choice of noodles, whether you use the penne or the fagioli, the sauce has really clung to these noodles, and it's going to give each bite that really delicious, sweet and savory bite. So I'll let this stay warm. Again, this is just on low heat, so it stays warm. Okay, so to cook our sage, we're going to put this over medium-high heat, depending on if you have a gas stove or an induction or electric stove. Of course, these are going to be a little different. Mine's a gas, so I usually put over medium because this can get pretty hot. And we wait for our skillet to get hot. You absolutely don't have to use a cast iron. I just prefer cast iron as a fully plant-based eater because this can be a really good source of iron in my diet. All right, once it is hot, we'll add the remaining oil. So depending on the size of your pan, you might need like 2 to 3 tablespoons. We really just want to be able to heavily coat the bottom of the pan. So we're pan frying, not deep frying, which means we just have a coat of oil on the bottom. We're not fully submerging our substance, okay? All right, we'll let that get hot for just a couple of seconds. And then we'll sprinkle our sage in, getting it nice and crispy. Trying to make sure there's not a bunch of clumps, but do the best you can. Here we go. Now this is gonna cook pretty quickly, but make sure everything is in the oil, right? Our house is a little crooked, so I notice when I'm cooking that the oil might pool to one side of the pan. Anyone else have that problem? Now keep an eye, especially if you chopped your sage beforehand, because again, this is really fragile. It can burn very quickly. But while it's frying for the next minute or so, make sure you have a paper towel lined plate. The key to getting crispy sage is to allow any excess oil to drip off after cooking and then give it some time to come to room temperature and cool down, because that's when it gets a bit crispier. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off this. Okay, ooh, it smells so good. So we'll let this cool off. As you can see, the oil is kind of seeping into the the paper towel, and I can already feel these getting a little crispier. So another option here is to take some sea salt or iodized salt and add a little extra flavor by putting some salt on top, and that'll be kind of this like nice little flavor combination with our pasta. So when you're cooking, I really want you to think about the flavor components of your dish. We are meant to eat food that is flavorful. A lot of times we're left unsatisfied with foods because we have this diet mentality around it that it needs to be bland and tasteless, because the foods and ingredients and condiments that make food taste delicious are high in calories, are high in sugar, are high in fat. We are meant to eat food that tastes good, and we are often left unsatisfied because we didn't truly enjoy the food, okay? Satisfaction comes from fullness, so eating enough food with the right combination of foods, and from flavor, okay? Have you ever finished a really like tasteless, not very enjoyable meal, and then you're like hungry 30 minutes to an hour later? It's happened to me. So if you really do want to enjoy your food, because that satisfaction plays a huge role in your overall nourishment, both physically and mentally. So that ground cinnamon, that ground nutmeg really complemented the pureed pumpkin. Those spices work really well with winter squash, like butternut squash and acorn squash. And then your sage, the crispy sage, is a great topping to use, like a fresh winter fall herb in here. Very, very seasonal, which is something we love to do as plant-based foodies, is eat based on the season. Naturally helps us increase the variety of different foods that we're eating. Okay, let's serve this up. Looks delicious. Can always come back for more, right? You also don't need to finish your plate or what you've served. You can always put anything extra back in the fridge, save it. All right, add that nice crispy sage. As an option, I also like to add a little bit of vegan Parmesan. So if you like to have those plant-based cheeses in your fridge or something like this, you can add some great flavor. Look at that. Yum, yum, yum. Okay, go ahead and taste test this. So this is a great fall dish to incorporate some very seasonal plant-based foods. Get to know different types of plant-based protein sources like the cashew cream that we use for the pasta sauce. I hope it really inspired some creativity in the kitchen and got you a little more comfortable with playing around with flavor preferences and, changing up the sauce based on what you add. It's really good warm, I will say that. If you have any leftovers, you can store them in the refrigerator in an airtight container for up to 4 to 5 days. Again, if you decided to save the pasta sauce, that can stay in the freezer for up to 3 months. I don't recommend freezing the cooked pasta with the sauce. Cooked pasta, like in this type of dish, really doesn't come out right when it's thawed, loses a lot of the texture and flavor. So just a heads up on that. But just a few things to reflect on. How did you feel being in the kitchen, cooking something from almost scratch, right? How did you feel playing around with the different flavors and different ingredients? Was there anything you would change? Was there anything that you feared, or you had like a dieting type of thought, like, oh, that's too many calories or too much fat, too much carbohydrates? What came up around those thoughts? And ask yourself why. Where is that coming from? And then ask yourself, how can you maybe create a more compassionate relationship with food in your body? How did this experience help you with that? Help you better connect with your food? And when you go and sit down and enjoy this meal with hopefully minimal distractions, can you really use all of your senses to engage in the meal and feel truly satisfied with the dish? Okay. Thank you so much for joining me in today's cooking demonstration. I hope you learned a little something about plant-based cooking and doing it with a non-diet approach. Again, my name is Shannon, owner and founder of Chef Shannon Nutrition. You can join me on my Patreon cooking community where we talk all things plant-based cooking and recipes to get inspired and feel supported. I also provide one-on-one nutrition coaching and a group coaching program. Please look out for your email after attending today's demonstration for some more information on all of these offers and opportunities to connect with plant-based foodies. Buon appetito!